I never imagined a Tuesday afternoon could change my life so drastically. There I was, immersed in work, analyzing the details of a multimillion-dollar deal. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the low hum of my laptop. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the desk. Absorbed in the numbers, I ignored it at first. But then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, curiosity won out. I glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number. Strange, but not completely out of the ordinary in my line of work. Assuming it was a persistent sales rep or a wrong number, I shrugged it off. But when the phone rang for the 4th time, I decided to answer. Before I could even greet the caller, a man's frantic voice cut through. "Tell Mallory to stop playing games, or this won't end well." I froze. "Mallory, my Mallory. Who is this?" I demanded, my chest tightening as heat surged through me. Pause followed, like the caller just realized his mistake. When he spoke again, his tone was calmer. "Wait, this isn't Trevor, is it?" "No, it's not," I replied, my mind racing. "Who's Trevor? And why are you calling about my wife?" Another silence, this time longer, more deliberate. Finally, he muttered, "I've said too much," and hung up. My pulse skyrocketed, but not in the way you'd expect. I didn't lash out or yell. Years in business had taught me to think before reacting. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I needed to find out what it was. If Mallory was involved in something, I wouldn't rely on vague accusations or a stranger's words. I needed to see it with my own eyes. With a deep breath, I leaned back in my chair. The name Trevor echoed in my mind. Who was he? What was his connection to my wife of 25 years, the woman I'd trusted implicitly until now? I grabbed my jacket, told my assistant there was an emergency, and headed home. If Mallory was hiding something, I was determined to uncover it. When I arrived, the house was empty. Mallory's car wasn't in the garage, giving me time to think. I stepped inside, tossed my keys on the counter, and did something I hadn't done in years. I checked her computer. I wasn't acting out of paranoia. This was strategy. I wasn't looking for vague signs but concrete proof. Her emails seemed ordinary. No suspicious messages or unusual contacts. But her calendar told a different story. Every Thursday, for the past 3 months, she had blocked off a 3-hour window for meetings or errands. At first glance, it seemed harmless. Mallory was always organized. But now, a pattern emerged, and the adrenaline in my veins surged. Still, I played it cool. I dialed her number and kept my voice casual. "Hey, what time are you coming home?" Her tone was just as casual, almost too casual. "I'm finishing up with Melanie. I'll be home in an hour." "Why? Everything okay?" Melanie. That name hit me like a puzzle piece falling into place. Melanie was a neighbor Mallory used to meet for lunch occasionally, but I hadn't heard her name in months. Something didn't add up, but I stayed calm. "Yeah, just wondering if we're still on for dinner," I replied. "Of course," she said warmly. "Can't wait. See you soon." When I hung up, my heart raced. I opened our location-sharing app, something we'd set up years ago for emergencies. Mallory wasn't with Melanie. She wasn't even in the same part of town. Her location showed her across the city in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew I was onto something. And when I'm onto something, I don't let go. That night, Mallory came home precisely an hour after our call, looking fresh and cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek and suggested we order takeout. Her demeanor was flawless. No signs of guilt, no nervous energy. She played her part perfectly, but I knew better. The next morning, I called an old friend, Jared, a private investigator I'd helped out years ago. I explained the situation without diving into details. "I need you to follow Mallory. Thursdays. Just find out where she goes." Jared agreed without hesitation. By Thursday, he was on the case. That morning, I kissed Mallory goodbye, keeping up appearances. Hours dragged by as I waited for any updates. Finally, in the afternoon, a text from Jared came through. "Meet me at the park near your house at 6 p.m. We need to talk." I didn't respond. My instincts told me this wasn't good, but I had to know. I told my office I had a last-minute meeting and drove straight to the park. Jared was waiting, leaning against his car, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen. "Tell me," I said, skipping the formalities. Without hesitation, Jared got straight to the point. "She's seeing someone," he said plainly. "This morning. She didn't go anywhere near where she told you she'd be. Instead, she drove across town to a hotel. She met a man in the parking lot. I've got photos," even though I'd mentally prepared for this moment. Hearing it out loud hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened as Jared handed me his phone. There they were, Mallory, smiling without a care in the world, walking toward a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than me, tall, athletic, dressed casually. He opened the door for her like a gentleman, and they disappeared inside the hotel together. I stared at the photos, the silence between Jared and me growing heavier by the second. Every suspicion I'd harbored was now undeniable, staring back at me from that screen. Yet I didn't explode. The anger was there, simmering beneath the surface, but I wasn't one to act impulsively. "What's the plan?" Jared asked cautiously. I pocketed my phone, the images seared into my memory. "Keep following her. I need more. If I confront her now, she'll just lie. I want to know everything. Who he is, what she's thinking, how long this has been going on. I need the full picture." Jared nodded, his face unreadable. "I'll keep digging. You'll have everything by the end of next week." We parted ways, and as I drove home, my thoughts raced. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation. No, Mallory had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. She thought she was in control, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. That night, Mallory came home as if nothing had happened. She hummed to herself while cooking dinner, her demeanor so calm it made my stomach churn. I watched her carefully, every movement feeling rehearsed, every word spoken like a line from a play. "Long day?" she asked, setting a plate in front of me, her smile as radiant as ever. "Yeah, just the usual," I replied, keeping my voice steady while the storm inside me grew. For the next few days, I played my role flawlessly, calm, collected, and oblivious. But every moment I spent near her, I was silently crafting my next move. Then Friday arrived. Jared called, his voice tense. "I've got everything. You'll want to see this." We met again, and this time he handed me a thick envelope. "It's not just some random fling," he said gravely. "This has been going on for months. Maybe longer." I opened the envelope, its weight symbolic of the betrayal inside. Photos, logs, notes, Jared had documented it all. This wasn't just about hotel meetups. They had an entire routine, a secret life. Dinner dates, trips out of town, weekends supposedly spent with friends. All lies. The final blow came when Jared handed me a single sheet of paper, his face darker than before. "You might want to sit down for this part." I unfolded the paper slowly, the words sinking in like lead. The man Mallory was with wasn't a stranger. He was a former client, someone I'd worked with years ago. A man whose business had failed after losing a massive deal to me. And now, it seemed, he'd found his way to exact revenge. Not through money, but through my wife. It all made sense now. This wasn't just an affair born of lust or boredom. It was calculated, deliberate. Mallory wasn't just betraying me emotionally. This was personal, targeted. That night, I barely slept. My mind ran through every angle, every possibility. Confronting her now would accomplish nothing. Mallory had played her game effortlessly for months, maybe years, without raising suspicion. If I wanted to take her down, I had to outthink her. One misstep, and she'd slip away, spinning her lies as she always did. By morning, the realization struck me. I'd been viewing this affair as just another betrayal, but it was more than that. This was a strategic move, a deliberate act with deeper motives. Mallory wasn't foolish, and neither was I. I needed her to believe she was still in control. Let her think she was winning. Only then could I turn the tables. That weekend, I pored over Jared's report, examining every detail with laser focus. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Mallory realized she wasn't the only one playing this game. It might finally be time to start planning what comes next. Retirement, traveling, maybe even new investments, I said casually, testing the waters. Mallory smiled, but I caught a flicker of calculation in her eyes. She didn't know the full scope of my finances yet, but soon she'd think she did. That was when the real fun would begin. Mallory had always been adept at hiding her true intentions, but when it came to money, she couldn't quite mask her excitement. The moment I brought up our financial future, I saw a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She was hooked, and I could feel it. Her demeanor shifted subtly, leaning in closer, asking just the right questions, probing without seeming too eager. She had no idea what was coming, but she was already walking into the trap. As we drove along the coast, I kept talking, carefully feeding her bits of information to keep her interest piqued. I mentioned the business doing well, a few smart investments, and the promising potential for growth. She played it off with feigned curiosity, but her eyes betrayed her, burning with a hunger to know the exact numbers. "I'm glad to hear things are going well," she said, her voice sweet but her gaze sharp. "I've been thinking about our future too, you know? We've worked so hard, it would be nice to finally enjoy it. Don't you think?" I had to suppress a laugh at her attempt to sound genuine. "Exactly," I replied with a nod. "I think it's time we start planning for what's next. In fact, I've been looking into properties out of state. Something remote, maybe even a vacation home. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Her response was immediate, though she tried to mask her enthusiasm. "A vacation home?" she repeated, her voice just a touch too casual. "That sounds amazing. Where are you thinking?" "Someplace peaceful," I said, glancing her way to gauge her reaction. "Maybe in the mountains. A quiet retreat where we can truly get away from it all. No distractions, no interruptions." For a split second, her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. I could almost see her mind racing, wondering if my words were a subtle hint that I knew about her affair. Still, she played along with practiced ease. "That sounds perfect," she said, her voice overly bright. "After all these years, we deserve something like that. I've always dreamed of having a place to escape to. Escape." She had no idea how fitting that word was. As I spoke, my thoughts wandered to Bryce, imagining him in a panic after my subtle messages the night before. I could almost picture him scrambling to figure out what I knew, trying to control the situation just as Mallory was. I wanted them both on edge, teetering under the pressure. By the time we got home, Mallory was buzzing with faux excitement. She started peppering me with questions about the properties I'd been considering, throwing out decorating ideas, and gushing about the possibilities for our future. It was almost laughable how easily she slipped into this act. I played along, giving her just enough to keep her invested, while masking the deep satisfaction bubbling beneath my calm exterior. I knew she'd run to Bryce the first chance she got. She'd tell him about the money, the vacation home, and how everything was going perfectly, exactly as planned. Later that night, while Mallory was in the shower, likely texting Bryce under the guise of her self-care routine, I put the final pieces of my plan in motion. First, I checked in with my lawyer to ensure all my assets were securely locked down. The business was untouchable, the money hidden away. Mallory wouldn't see a single penny, but I wanted her to believe there was a fortune waiting just within her grasp. The bait had to be irresistible. Next, I called Jared. "Keep an eye on Mallory's accounts," I instructed. "Specifically, look for any large transactions. If she's planning to make a move, she'll need to start shifting money around. When she does, I want to know." Jared agreed without hesitation. "I'll keep watch. If she's up to something, it won't take long." Hanging up, a grim satisfaction settled in my chest. The wheels were turning, and Mallory had no idea she was walking straight into my trap. The thought of her conspiring with Bryce, believing they could walk away with half my life, only made the irony sweeter. Over the next few days, I watched Mallory closely. She thought she was being careful, texting only when I wasn't looking, keeping her phone face down, stepping out of the room for calls. But I noticed everything. Her smiles across the dinner table were forced, her warmth a thin veneer hiding the cracks beneath. I mirrored her act, playing the part of the loving, oblivious husband perfectly. And then Thursday arrived. Mallory slipped out of the house like clockwork, dressed to impress in one of her so-called girls' night-out outfits. A little too fancy for just dinner with friends. I didn't say a word, just kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun, and waited for the door to close behind her. The second she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time, I didn't need Jared's help. I wanted to see everything with my own eyes. I trailed her at a safe distance, my pulse steady, my mind sharp. This wasn't anger, at least not yet. This was strategy. As I followed her across town, I couldn't help but notice how careless she was. She didn't even check her mirrors, completely oblivious to the fact that I was right behind her. Mallory pulled into the same hotel as always, her routine unchanged. It was almost insulting how little effort she put into hiding her tracks, as if she thought I was too naive to catch on. I parked a block away, far enough to avoid detection but close enough to watch. Sure enough, Bryce arrived moments later, walking into the hotel with a smugness that made my stomach churn. It was the same air of confidence he probably wore when he tried to undercut me all those years ago. But tonight, he wasn't the one holding the cards. I waited for what felt like hours, though it was likely no more than 30 minutes. As expected, Mallory emerged first, slipping out of the hotel alone. This time, I didn't follow her. I already knew where she was headed. My focus was on Bryce now. I moved my car closer, parked out front, and stepped inside. The receptionist glanced up but didn't stop me. I knew exactly where I was going, thanks to Jared's meticulous work. Room 312. My heart thudded in my chest, not from nerves but from the cold, calculated focus driving me forward. This wasn't about rage or impulse. This was about control. Standing before the door, I knocked. Once, twice, and waited. A moment later, the door opened just a crack, revealing Bryce's face. Confusion flickered across his features before recognition set in, draining the color from his cheeks. "Evening, Bryce," I said, my voice calm and steady. "We need to talk." He froze, gripping the door handle tightly, his wide eyes darting down the hallway like a trapped animal. It was the first time we'd come face to face since all of this began, and the fear in his expression was palpable. Can I help you?" he stammered, his voice lacking the bravado he probably showed Mallory. "Help me?" I repeated, a faint smile curling my lips but never reaching my eyes. "Not quite. But it's time you and I had a conversation, don't you think?" Bryce hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the hallway again, clearly calculating his chances of escape. He knew better. With a resigned sigh, he stepped back and opened the door wider, letting me in. The room was as unimpressive as I expected. Small, musty, and reeking of cheap cologne and stale air conditioning. The bed was unmade, and Mallory's purse sat on the nightstand like a taunting reminder of her betrayal. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and kept my focus. This wasn't the time for emotion. Bryce closed the door awkwardly, shuffling on his feet like a guilty child caught red-handed. "Look, man," he began, his voice shaky. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Didn't plan for it?" I said, my tone sharp. "That's interesting, considering you've been meeting my wife in secret for months. That seems pretty deliberate to me. Or am I missing something?" He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He was scrambling, the same way he probably did when he tried to sabotage me years ago. Only this time, there was no exit strategy. He wasn't in control here. I took a seat in one of the cheap hotel chairs, crossing my legs as though I had all the time in the world. "Here's the thing, Bryce," I said, my voice even but firm. "You made a mistake. A big one. And now you've got a problem because I know everything." He flinched at that word, his eyes darting toward the door again, his thoughts likely racing with possible escape routes. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "You thought this was just about an affair, didn't you? That you could swoop in, get Mallory on your side, and walk away with the spoils. What was the plan? Convince her to leave me and go after half of what I've built? Were you hoping for a nice little payout for your trouble?" Bryce blinked, caught off guard by how much I knew. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. It wasn't about that. Mallory said. She said you guys were done. She said you didn't care anymore. I chuckled darkly, shaking my head. Mallory said a lot of things, didn't she? But let me clue you in on something important. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Mallory doesn't know how much I'm actually worth. And you thought you were playing me. But the truth is, I've been watching both of you. Here's the kicker, Mallory isn't getting a dime. Bryce's face turned ghostly pale. I could almost see the wheels in his head spinning, trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so quickly. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low but cutting. You thought you could outsmart me, but you didn't even have all the facts, I said. Mallory isn't entitled to my business. It's locked down airtight. She can try all she wants, but the millions she's dreaming about, she'll never see it, and neither will you. Bryce swallowed hard, the last remnants of his bravado evaporating. Look, man, he stammered, Mallory didn't tell me anything about the money. I didn't even know. I cut him off, standing up deliberately to tower over him. I don't care what she told you. What matters now is how this ends. You thought you could worm your way into my life, take what wasn't yours, and walk away clean. But here's the reality. You're not walking away. His eyes widened in panic, and he instinctively took a step back, bumping into the nightstand behind him. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, all traces of arrogance gone. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting him stew in his own fear before speaking again. My tone was cold, calculated. What I want is for you to disappear, I said, taking another step closer. You're going to end this, whatever this is, with Mallory. No more meetings, no more secret texts, nothing. You're going to tell her it's over, and then you're going to vanish from both of our lives. If I see you again, if you so much as think about coming near her or me, I will ruin you. Financially, professionally, personally. You already lost once, Bryce. Don't make me beat you again. Bryce's mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just watched his life crumble before his eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly, his body responding before his brain could catch up. Okay, he muttered, barely audible. I'll end it. I'll walk away. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Good, because if you don't trust me when I say that the next time we meet, it won't just be a conversation. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving Bryce standing frozen in the middle of the cheap hotel room, his life unraveling as the door clicked shut behind me. As I made my way to my car, a wave of satisfaction coursed through me. He was done, shaken to his core, fully aware of the position he had put himself in. But Mallory was next. Bryce was just the opening act. Sitting in my car, I let the quiet settle in around me, thinking about my next move. I had all the evidence I needed, but this confrontation couldn't happen in a cheap hotel or in the heat of some emotional explosion. No, I wanted Mallory to feel the full weight of her decisions, to understand the gravity of her betrayal. And when the time came, I'd be ready. The next few days felt like navigating a minefield. Mallory was clearly rattled, but I kept my distance, watching her every move, waiting for her to crack. I knew she'd be thrown off balance after Bryce ended things, and I was curious to see how she'd react. The beauty of it was, she had no idea I'd orchestrated the entire situation. By Wednesday, her behavior started to shift. She was jumpier, more cautious. The secret of texting had stopped, and the furtive phone calls were gone. Instead, she glanced at her phone nervously when she thought I wasn't looking. She was unraveling, but she hadn't cracked. Not yet. That evening, as we sat at the dinner table, her silence was deafening. She picked at her food, her usual small talk nowhere to be found. Her eyes were distant, lost in some internal debate. Everything okay? I asked lightly, my fork hovering over my plate. I wanted to see how far she'd go to keep up the act. Mallory looked up, startled, as if I'd interrupted some deep internal monologue. Yeah, just a lot on my mind lately, she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Work's been stressful, she added. Work? That was rich. She hadn't mentioned work stress in months, maybe even years. But I nodded, pretending to care, as she pushed her food around her plate. Later that night, I sat on the couch, flipping through channels, waiting for her to make a move. She wandered the house, restless, her mind clearly preoccupied. Finally, she sat down beside me, the air between us thick with tension. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than usual, "about us, about the future," and there it was, the setup. I let the silence hang for a moment before turning to her, feigning curiosity. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, the gears in her head clearly turning as she tried to choose her words carefully. I feel like we've been growing apart lately. You've been so focused on work, and I've been, well, trying to figure things out. That's one way to put it." The anger simmered just beneath the surface, but I kept my face neutral, letting her dig herself deeper. "I don't know," Mallory began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Maybe we've just been so busy, so distracted by everything else, that we haven't really focused on us." Her voice carried a faint tremor, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. She hesitated, glancing at me briefly before continuing. "I was thinking, maybe we should take a break, to clear our heads and figure out what we really want." The audacity of her suggestion almost made me laugh. A break? She was trying to spin this entire situation, to turn the blame onto me. As if her affair wasn't the root of all this. As if her betrayal wasn't the reason things had changed. But I wasn't about to tip my hand just yet. "A break?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, playing along. "What kind of break are you thinking about?" Her face softened in visible relief, probably because I hadn't immediately pushed back. She must have thought I was falling for her carefully constructed narrative. "Just some time apart," she said, her tone almost pleading. "You could focus on work and I could, figure things out for myself. I think it might help us both get some clarity." I leaned back in my chair, pretending to mull it over. "So, a separation?" She flinched, clearly startled by the word. No, not a separation," she insisted quickly, backpedaling. "Just some time to clear our heads. That's all. I think it could be good for us." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing with how to use this against her. She thought she was controlling the narrative, but in reality, she was walking straight into my trap. "Maybe you're right," I said thoughtfully, keeping my tone measured. "Some time apart might be good. I have been working a lot, and if you need space, I don't want to stand in your way." Her eyes widened slightly, betraying her surprise. She clearly hadn't expected me to agree so easily, but she quickly recovered, giving me a weak smile. "Yeah," she said, her voice soft. "I think it'll give us both some perspective." I stood up, walking to the window and staring out at the darkened street. I let the silence linger just a little longer, building the tension. Finally, I turned back to her. I began slowly. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, too." Mallory's eyes snapped to mine, her body tensing visibly. She wasn't ready for this. I walked back to the couch deliberately, each step measured. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You remember how we talked about our financial future a few weeks ago?" I asked. "Well, I've been thinking about it a lot. About how much I've worked for, how important it is to protect what's mine. Just in case something unexpected happens." Her face paled slightly, her hands tightening into fists in her lap. She tried to mask her unease, but the tension in her body gave her away. She could sense something was coming, but she didn't know what. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone. "You see, Mallory, I've been very careful with our finances. Everything we have, everything I've built is protected. The business, the assets, everything. And I made sure that nothing can touch it. Not even if you decide to leave." Her face froze as the realization dawned on her. She tried to maintain her composure, but the panic rising behind her eyes was unmistakable. What are you saying?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I'm saying that no matter what happens, Mallory," I continued, standing to tower over her, "you're not getting anything. The house, the business, the money you thought you'd walk away with, it's all mine. You've been playing a dangerous game, and you've already lost." Her mouth opened and closed, her words failing her. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. Gone was the composed, calculating Mallory. In her place was a woman scrambling to understand how everything had crumbled so quickly. You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh, I knew," I said, my tone sharp and unwavering. "I've known for weeks. The late nights, the secret texts, the hotel visits. I know all of it." Her face twisted in shock as I delivered the final blow. "And so does Bryce," I added. At the mention of his name, her expression shifted, a mix of anger and disbelief. "Bryce," she repeated, her voice shaking. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I paid him a visit. He's done, Mallory." He walked away, just like you're about to. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually try to apologize, to claw her way back. But then her expression hardened, her features twisting with rage. "You think you can just do this to me?" she hissed, standing and glaring at me with venom in her voice. "You think you can just throw me out after everything we've been through? After all the years I've put into this marriage?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "What marriage? The one you've been lying your way through for months? Don't act like the victim, Mallory. You made your choice." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "I'll get a lawyer," she spat. "I'll take you for everything you've got. You can't just cut me out like this. I'll ruin you. You've already lost," I said calmly, my voice cutting through her fury like a blade. "The lawyers won't save you. Everything is locked down. You won't even see a fraction of what you think you deserve. You ruined yourself the moment you decided to betray me." The silence between us was deafening, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but laced with malice. "You'll regret this," she said, her tone a dark promise. I shook my head, meeting her gaze without flinching. "No, Mallory. You will." The next morning, Mallory was gone. She'd packed a small bag and left a note on the counter. Short, venomous, and devoid of apology. "You're going to regret this. This isn't over." I smiled to myself, knowing that she was wrong. The fight was everything I expected. Mallory wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She was a strategist, just like me. But what she didn't realize was that I had already dismantled her plan while she was still scrambling to figure out where the pieces went. I took her venomous note, crumpled it in my fist, and tossed it into the trash. Let her threaten all she wanted. It didn't matter. She didn't understand the game was already over. She'd lost. But knowing Mallory, she'd keep fighting until the bitter end, convinced there was still a way to claw her way back. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. My lawyer finalized the paperwork, locking down everything I'd built. Mallory could hire the best attorney in the state, but it wouldn't matter. There were no loopholes, no weak points, nothing she could exploit. She could fight all she wanted, but all she'd find was a locked safe with no combination. Meanwhile, Jared kept tabs on Mallory. She wasn't exactly hiding. In fact, she made it easy. She'd moved in with her friend Melanie, one of her longtime socialite buddies who seemed more than happy to give her a place to regroup. Jared confirmed that Melanie's place was where Mallory was holed up, likely trying to plan her next move. What she didn't realize was that I was already 3 steps ahead. The day after she left, I took a drive across town, the kind of quiet drive where your thoughts wander to everything but the road. I arrived at my lawyer Austin's office just before noon. I didn't need to be there in person, but there was something deeply satisfying about watching the final details come together firsthand. When I stepped into the conference room, Austin greeted me with a firm handshake. "Everything's in place," he said, his tone professional but carrying a hint of satisfaction. He'd been with me since the beginning, back when my business was just an idea. Now, he was helping me close the final chapter of Mallory's influence. "Good," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "Let's make it airtight." Austin pushed a stack of papers across the table. "Already done. The business is fully secured. She can contest it, but she won't get anywhere. As for the house, if she wants to fight for it, she'll have a hell of a time. The equity is in your name, And since you've already moved most of your liquid assets out of joint accounts, there's nothing left for her to take. I skimmed through the documents, checking the key points. Everything was exactly as it should be. Mallory had no claim. She could cry, scream, or throw an army of lawyers at me. But she'd still walk away with nothing but a few personal items and the bitter taste of defeat. She's gonna go ballistic, I said, leaning back in my chair. Austin smirked faintly. Let her. The louder she gets, the more she exposes herself. Legally, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. It was done. The final nail in the coffin of what was once our life together. There was no turning back now. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Not empty exactly, but quiet in a way that was almost unsettling. Mallory's presence, her energy, was completely gone. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls as the silence wrapped around me. Part of me felt relief, freedom even, but another part of me felt something darker, something heavier. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out. After 25 years of marriage, I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing a partner, a co-conspirator, someone who had once been in perfect sync with me. And now that person had become my enemy. But I couldn't dwell on it. Mallory had made her choices and I had made mine. It was time to move on. The next morning, Mallory's world began unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. Started with a phone call. I was sipping my coffee when my phone buzzed. Jared's voice was urgent, though not panicked. I've been keeping tabs on Mallory like you asked, he said, and something interesting just came up. You're not going to believe this. Go on, I said, intrigued. She's been trying to reach Bryce, Jared continued, but he's not responding. In fact, he seems to have vanished. I did some digging, and it turns out Bryce is in worse financial trouble than we realized. He skipped town, probably out of cash or hiding from creditors. Either way, he's left Mallory high and dry. I couldn't help but laugh. The poetic justice was too perfect. Mallory's supposed knight in shining armor had bolted at the first sign of trouble. She'd thought she had an escape plan, a backup. Instead, she was stranded and alone. Serves her right, I said, setting down my coffee. Let her see what it feels like to be abandoned. But Jared wasn't finished. There's more, he said. I don't know how, but Melanie, Mallory's friend, is in on it too. She's been pushing Mallory to file for divorce, but it looks like they were banking on Bryce helping out financially. Now that he's gone, their plan is falling apart. They're scrambling. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. This was better than I could have planned. Mallory was losing control, and the people she thought she could rely on were proving to be just as unreliable as she was. 2 days later, the call I'd been waiting for finally came. Can we talk? Mallory's voice was strained, barely holding it together. I let the silence stretch for a long moment, making her feel the weight of her request. Finally, I replied, my voice calm and steady. Sure, but I'm not sure there's much left to say. We agreed to meet at the house. She didn't have many options left, and she knew it. When she arrived, I was already waiting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand. Mallory walked in, looking drained and defeated. Nothing like the confident, manipulative woman I had confronted weeks ago. Now she was desperate. She sat across from me, her eyes searching mine for something, anything, that could give her the upper hand. But there was nothing left for her to find. I've made mistakes, she began, her voice trembling. I know that, but you can't just leave me with nothing. Not after everything we've been through. Everything we've been through? I repeated, leaning forward, my tone sharp. Mallory, the moment you decided to betray me, you forfeited any claim to the life we built together. I've protected what's mine, and you're not getting a single piece of it. Her face twisted with frustration. I loved you, she said, her voice breaking, but you shut me out. You made me feel invisible. I shook my head, staring her down. Don't blame me for your choices, Mallory. You could have talked to me. You could have fought for us. But instead, you lied. You cheated. And you did it for months without a second thought. You don't get to play the victim now. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I knew those tears weren't for me. They were for herself, for the life she thought she could still salvage. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice small, defeated. I stood, towering over her. "I don't want anything from you, Mallory. I've already got what I want. You're out of my life and I'm keeping everything I've worked for. You've lost." She looked up at me, her face a mixture of anger and sorrow. But she knew it was over. There were no more cards to play, no more lies to spin. She stood, wiping her eyes, and without another word, she walked out of the house for the last time. I watched her go, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. The woman who had once been my wife was now a stranger, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. The door clicked softly behind her, and just like that, 25 years of marriage ended in silence. The house felt bigger now, emptier, but in a good way. The lies, the pretense, the tension, they were all gone. I was free, and so was she, though her version of freedom would feel more like a cage once reality fully set in. For a moment, I stood staring at the door, letting the weight of the last few months settle over me. But instead of sadness, I felt relief. The storm had passed. I had survived. More than that, I had won. The Mallory who walked out that door wasn't the woman I had once built a life with, and that was fine by me. But I wasn't quite done yet. I still had one last card to play. One final move to ensure Mallory never forgot the price of her betrayal. The following morning, I paid a final visit to Austin's office. This wasn't about finalizing assets or securing my financial future. This was personal. Austin greeted me with his usual professionalism, though I could tell he was curious about the last-minute meeting. We sat in his office as sunlight streamed through the windows. I explained the final part of my plan. "I want to give her something," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Not money. Nothing she can use to crawl out of the mess she's made. I want to give her a lesson." Austin raised an eyebrow. "A lesson?" I nodded, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Exactly. She's still convinced she can manipulate her way out of this, that she can recover and come out on top. I want her to understand just how deep she's sunk." As I laid out the details, Austin listened carefully. When I finished, he gave a low whistle. "I have to hand it to you. That's thorough. Cold but thorough." "That's the point," I replied, standing up. "This isn't about kindness. It's about consequences." The next few days passed quietly. I returned to work, focused on the future, and waited for the final part of my plan to unfold. I had no intention of dragging this out. No prolonged battles, no drawn-out negotiations. Mallory would receive her gift soon enough. On Friday, I received a text from Austin just before noon. Delivered. I smiled, knowing that Mallory's world was about to shift in a way she hadn't anticipated. At exactly 3 p.m., a courier arrived at Melanie's house, where Mallory had been staying. She was probably expecting legal documents, maybe even a settlement offer. Anything that might indicate she still had some semblance of control. Instead, she opened the package to find something far worse. Inside was a single piece of paper and a flash drive. The paper was a letter from me, simple and direct. "Mallory, you lost. This is your reality now. Watch the video. You'll understand everything soon." I could picture her confusion as she stared at the flash drive, trying to decipher what kind of game I was playing. But her curiosity would get the better of her. I knew it would. When she plugged it into her laptop, the truth would hit her like a freight train. The video contained footage of her and Bryce. Every meeting, every hotel rendezvous, every intimate moment they thought was hidden. Captured by the security cameras Jared had installed without their knowledge, it was undeniable. But that wasn't the worst part. At the end of the video was a timestamp and a location. Bryce's new address, the one he hadn't shared with her. I had tracked him down after he skipped town and made sure she knew exactly where to find him. Along with the address was one final message. "You're not the only one he's been lying to." Mallory thought her betrayal was limited to me. She believed Bryce was her safety net, her way out. But the truth was much darker. Bryce had been playing her just like he had played me years ago. He wasn't just broke. He'd been stringing her along with empty promises, preparing to abandon her the moment things got complicated. That was the final blow. the one that would destroy whatever hope she had left. By the time the sun set, Mallory would be standing alone, staring at the ruins of the life she thought she could rebuild. She had gambled everything and lost. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet house. For the first time in months, peace washed over me. There was no anger, no resentment, just closure. I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked out to the patio, and sat down in the early morning light. The weight of everything that had happened was still there, but it was lighter now, easier to bear. Mallory was out of my life. The chapter that had been dragging me down was finally closed. In the end, I realized that the real victory wasn't in the revenge or even in watching Mallory's world collapse. The true triumph was walking away, knowing I had survived, knowing I had won. But most importantly, knowing I was finally free. The game was over and I had won.